Hi everybody, I'm Tony Corbell and welcome to our webinar for the day. Today's going to be fun. For me, it's exciting. We're going to be talking all about creating depth in a photograph, creating in portrait photography specifically, creating depth, shape, form, texture, dimension. And what we'll find out is all the controls that we have to enhance and add and really introduce depth into a photograph. You know, we did some research a while back, years ago, and we found where Da Vinci had one time said that in order to produce depth in a painting, you have to have 3 brightness levels. And I've mentioned this in my workshops for years. But you have to have the true brightness of your subject. And then you have to have a brightness that's brighter than that and a brightness that's darker than that. So basically, he's saying you got to have highlights and you got to have shadows if you're going to create depth. Now, for what that tells us is highlights and shadows. And we can only have highlights and shadows if we have directional light. You know, that's the difference between directional or dimension lighting versus flat lighting. The flatter the light, the closer the light is to the lens, you get fewer shadows, fewer highlights, less depth, less shape, less texture. All of that starts falling apart. But it's kind of fun when you think about it. We've got, and basically that all wraps up into the world of what's called 3-dimensional contrast. So, you know, it's funny, Dean Collins used to always joke and say that we live in a 4-dimensional environment where we have height, width, depth, and time, and we're trying to create a 3-dimensional representation, height, width, and depth, onto a 2-dimensional piece of paper, height and width, usually for a 1-dimensional client. Okay, well, anyway, that was what Dean Collins used to always say, and it was always fun. You know, if you listen to cinematographers, the great directors of photography and films, and what they all talk about is not so much the light, but they talk a lot about the shadow and how it's not about the presence of light that gives them depth on screen, but it's the presence of shadow that gives them more depth, drama, and specifically dimension. They really look for that dimension. In traditional portrait photography, we were always taught that there are 4 sort of light patterns for the face. The Rembrandt light and the split light, the loop lighting, and the paramount or butterfly light, and all those lights and those 4 lighting setups were descriptors, if you will, of how the shadow appeared on the face from the nose onto the lip or onto the cheek. So those different shapes, it was all about creating depth by different patterns on the face, and specifically shadows in that example. But there's an awful lot to talk about, and there's a lot more to think about with creating depth and drama. So we put together a little keynote show here that we're going to run and just play for. It's about 6 minutes, so if you'll just watch that. And it's basically going to define all the other different elements of depth that we have over which we can control. And I think it really might open your eyes a little bit to at least thinking a little bit differently about creating depth. So sit back, put your feet up for just a couple of minutes, watch this video. When we come back, we're going to draw a few things out on the board, we'll take a few questions, and then we'll bring our model Gabby on set and we'll take some pictures. So sit back, watch the video, and I'll be right back with you in about 6 or 7 minutes. Thanks, everyone. You know, in today's webinar, it's all about creating depth and with shape and form in photography. And certainly that's the main goal of what we're all about here. I wanted to make sure, though, before we talk about just creating depth and shape and form with light, I wanted to also illustrate some of the other things that are possible. If you look at it and think about depth for just a second, and in your own career certainly, we know that we can create depth by utilizing light. One of the key elements and one of the key descriptors of creating depth is with light. But at the same time, it's just as important that we are recording our image and utilizing shadows at the same time to give us depth, shape, form, and texture. Think about textures. And also, of course, we've got depth that's implied by our foreground, our midground, our background. We've got a lot of options. You can create depth by utilizing focus, motion, creating motion or implying motion, or freezing action sometimes. Depth is also achieved often by the shape of your subject. And that's something that we don't often think about, but also color as well. There's color depth in our photographs that can certainly aid in creating something with dimension, if you will. And then finally, design, the design of your picture and how you see the picture coming together. In this image, of course, it looks like there's good depth in this image, and it's basically created by the light. As in this one, this early morning sunrise picture in a cemetery in Memphis. But it's that edge light, that little bit of edge, that kiss of light that's sort of creating our depth. And that's something that we're going to talk about here in the studio shortly. Sunrise, again, this is in another cemetery. You'd think I have something going on for cemeteries. I just happen to find myself in cemeteries a lot when I travel, when I get up at the crack of dawn and I'm traveling. But here it's that light that really gives us that depth and that great dimension. At the same time, we can't ignore the shadows. And in an image like this, it's predominantly sort of a lower key. It seems like the shadow is where we're getting some of our depth, or a lot of our depth. This old Hollywood glamour look, it's the same thing. Same thing here with this black and white, really low-key image of this model showing off her tattoos on her back. And it's sort of the shadows that create the depth. Here, shot from a hotel balcony, looking down onto the hotel at sunrise. And the sun was just in the right place to put these shadows just where they should be in line with the products or the objects, to give us these great shadows that are sharp-edged, that give us and lend themselves to the design of the picture. And I just think it makes for a strong implication of depth, if you will. Now, we can't forget that we've got our background. We've always got our background, but we've also got foreground and midground. And when those are all coupled together, it really does help to imply that depth again. Here I'm shooting through some steps, some old rickety steps that have broken down, old dilapidated ghost town, if you will, and I just liked the different. Here I've got her in the midground. In the foreground, I've got these out of focus steps. In the background, I've got these pieces of lumber that are at an angle. Plus, there was a striped building in the background, and all of that helps add to the depth and the form and dimension of this photograph. Here I'm shooting in the studio, and I just moved over just a little bit to see the edge of my softbox as a blocker for the right third or so of the picture, just to add interest and make it feel as if I was shooting through something. And here, of course, this beautiful girl and with the piano, and then it's the background. There's depth with the background that's again implied. This old cowboy in Fort Worth, Texas, at the old stockyards. And for me, the guy in the background, the sheriff in the background, makes the shot. I mean, the light quality on the guy in the foreground is great, and I love the depth of his face, and that's got good light depth and shadow depth on his face. But that background is what does it for me in this, and that's what makes, for me, it's what makes this picture kind of come to life. So creating depth and shape and form and texture and dimension is huge for me. Even implied motion or focus can help tell the story, if you will, about depth. And I think it's just as important as any other aspects and other elements. Here we've created depth by the shape of the object we're photographing. The shapes here really does help lend itself to the dimension of the photograph. Again, shape, color. This is the Disney Music Hall in downtown Los Angeles. And this color really only happens at one time a day, well, maybe twice a day, sunrise and sunset, where you've got that screaming blue azure skies reflecting in all this chrome and this metallic building. And then I've also got the warmth of that setting sun or rising sun at that time of day to really help that. Well, to me, that depth of color is enormous, and I love the fact that I've got those two tonalities that happen to be opposite each other on the color wheel, so it makes it comfortable to the eye and for the viewer. Same thing here, that blue really contrasts with the warm background. And again, it's a depth created by color. This picture in black and white would fall apart. And then finally, there's depth by design. This is my friend and world-class photographer John Sexton at his gallery in Monterey, or in Carmel Valley, California. And I just he was just standing there relaxing for a second just before a video shoot. And I grabbed this shot, and I saw that I was going to crop it this way before I ever pulled the trigger. I knew exactly how I was going to crop it. Or maybe not crop is the right word, but maybe framing would be the correct word. But it's depth created by design. I knew I was going to do that. Let's get back to the webinar now. Let's go back live, and we're going to talk about photographing and creating depth with light. And we'll be talking with a model here on set in just a second. We're going to create some light on her and talk about how we can do that and pull all this off and bring it all together to create depth, shape, form, texture, and dimension. Welcome back. I hope that made a little bit of sense for you. I think that there's an awful lot of instances where we're in control of this, you guys. We're in charge of what our viewer sees in our photographs. And we can create as much drama or depth as we want or as little as we want. And so it's always going to be a subjective. You know, it's been said for years that photography is nothing more than the subjective use of an objective craft. You know, we're governed by science and physics of light and, you know, a lot of numbers. But it's all about opinions. You either like a picture or you don't. But I wanted to just draw out a couple of things on the board here, and let's just talk about them in terms of creating depth. And one of the things I remember years ago, a friend of mine was saying, you know, draw a balloon. So, okay, so, well, there's a balloon. Well, not exactly. There's sort of a ball or something, a sphere. But if I'm going to make a balloon out of that, I've got to introduce some depth there. So let's put a shadow on one side, and on the other side, let's put the highlight. Right? So now we're starting to see a balloon. Well, based on our size of our light source relative to its distance to the subject, those two will change. And if you think about this balloon represents exactly what Da Vinci said about having the true brightness of your subject, which would be the balloon there. That's the true brightness. And then the two that aren't true. There's the shadow and there's the highlight. Well, of those three brightnesses, you're totally in charge of two of them as the photographer. You're in charge of the highlight. You can make that highlight as big as you want, as bright as you want, or as dark as you want. You can make that shadow as soft as you want, or as hard as you want, or as dark as you want. This part, though, that true tonality of your subject, that's not your decision. That's up to you to record it appropriately and correctly so your subject will look like your subject truly looks. But the highlights and shadows, that's the subjective part, and that's the fun part for us as photographers, as creative artists. That's the part that's great for us, is we get to determine what that's going to look like. So in this case, if I really wanted to make a big change here, I could make that balloon a little bit different by putting a really big highlight here with a really large softbox, or by moving my smaller softbox up a lot closer and just toggle that to the up position. There you go. It just went on standby, didn't it? That's funny. And then by the size of the source, as my highlight increases in size, my shadow gets bigger and softer on the edge. So my shadow size edge over here now goes more like this. I don't know which one's right, folks. I don't know which one you want. I don't know what you're trying to do with your photography, but I do know that the smaller the source, the sharper edge shadow. The larger the source, the softer the edge shadow. And that's key, and that's something that we've got to understand. Now let's talk one more little bit of science here, and then we'll take some questions from you here in just a second. And by the way, if you'll scroll down on the screen that you're viewing now, if you can just scroll to the bottom of the screen, you can see join the chat room. I think it's what it says, join the chat room or follow the chat or whatever. So you can click in there and we'll take some questions from you in just a bit. But let me just show you what I'm talking about in terms of creating depth and a photograph with a full range of detail. So just bear with me another minute or two, and I promise we'll take pictures. We will take pictures. Okay, so let's just take a look at some squares here. I'm just going to put these squares up on the board. There's middle gray, which is 18% gray. So we're just going to do this. I'm going to open up one stop, and over here I've got light gray, and the light gray one is 36% gray. And I know you don't care about these numbers right now, and I promise I'll make sense out of this. And then we're going to have one over here that's, let's just call it white, and it's 72% gray. And on the other side of middle gray, we've got dark gray, and that's going to be about 9%. And then below that, we're going to have another one, and that's black. And that's way down here at 4.5% or something like that. Where all that falls on a response curve, so you can know where the detail will land. I do have a reason for telling you this, by the way, and I'm going to show you in just a second. But the reason we have to know this is on this big curve, here's a response curve. So that 18% gray, which is middle gray, it's halfway between white and black. And some people are like, well, why is it not 50% gray? Well, it's because in photography we live in a world of exponential. We live on a logarithmic curve, if that makes any sense, so that the previous number is always doubled. So 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, as opposed to an arithmetic or a straight line where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I double this 18% gray, if I open up one stop, I'm up here at 36%. And if I double that and go up here, now I'm up here at 72%. And you can see how close I am to having white without detail. And if I close down from 18% down to here, I'm at 9%. Down another one to black with detail down here, I'm way down here. Does that make sense? So that's my range of which I have to work. It's the usable range, what I call it the usable range of contrast. What's great about that is as soon as I've done all of that, as soon as I know all of that, here's what I get. Let's take a look at the back of your camera now, or let's open up Photoshop and let's look at your histogram. So let me look at 3 scenarios on your histogram, and I promise I'm going to make sense out of this, and we're going to take a picture. So let's say a normal exposure and an exposure that has full range detail is here in the middle. And you'll notice we got a little bit of a gap left and a little bit of a gap right. That tells me I've got detail in my highlights and shadows. Make sense? So if I open up, if this is a plus exposure up on top, this exposure might look like this on the histogram, where I've got some information outside of the histogram on the right. You guys, I know many of you know this already. So I know I'm preaching to the choir on this, but you got to make sure that if you want to produce an image with depth, you've got to have a full range image to really do a great job of depth. And of course, if I'm on a minus exposure is going to look something like this, where you've still got a lot of information outside of the histogram on the left side. Does that make sense? Anytime there's information outside of that histogram, as Will Crockett calls it, the pipe, when you've got information outside of the pipe, you're losing detail. And once you've lost detail, it's kind of hard to bring it back. There's some things that you can do and correct in post-production, but man, not very many. And it's just wasting more and more time in the evenings for you. So you want to try to avoid that as much as you can. So for me, at least, the biggie is to try to hit that one right there. That's my target, is to hit a histogram on my camera and on the back of or in my Photoshop or Lightroom. So I've got a full range histogram with little detail on the top, detail on the bottom, and I've got full range detail all the way through. That gives me the most rich image and one that will print really easily. For me too, it's a lot of it is about printing and making life easy, to make a file easy to print instead of trying to fight to get a good print. You shouldn't have to fight to get a good print. If you do this correctly, you should be in there. And of course, I'm always known for preaching about the world of the light meter. My best friend here, my L758 DR, will tell me where my exposure needs to be in order to produce that histogram in the middle. And I listen to this and do what it tells me to do. So it works really well for me. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Let me take a couple of questions. I'm going to look and see what we got here. What's your favorite light modifier to get shadows on black and white nudes? That sounds like one of my friends' questions. Chris Camargo is with us today out in Seattle. Hi, Chris. We were just together last weekend. What's your favorite light modifier to get shadows on black and white nudes? Funny story there is it depends. Do I want to create a look as if it was a window? And do I want hard edge shadows? Or do I want soft edge shadows? The great Robert Farber, who did such wonderful nudes all through the 70s and 80s, and he was really, really the master of shooting nudes. He used big, soft light sources, and he had these incredibly soft, beautiful shadows. So it's all about size of source relative to its distance and what you want that picture to look like. What is the effect of moving a soft light closer or further? It's exactly that, and we're going to illustrate that in just a second. The closer I move, well, let me put it to you like this. There are 3 things that change when I change the distance of a light source. If I can increase the size of my light source by bringing it closer to my subject, making the highlight bigger, as the highlight increases in size, it diminishes in brightness. I know it's a strange concept to grasp, but the size of my highlight will increase as the size of the source increases, and the density or the brightness of the highlight itself will diminish. And as it gets bigger and softer, the edge of the shadow gets softer. So those 3 things are affected. If I grab that light and double the distance and back it up, all of a sudden that highlight gets smaller, and as the highlight becomes smaller, it becomes brighter, and the shadow edge becomes sharper. Those 3 things are all tied together. I cannot get a soft shadow with a small hard edge light. Impossible. And if people tell you they can, well, then they're doing it in post-production, and they're killing themselves if that's the look that they're after, because it's really hard to achieve. There's a lot of things that we can cheat, folks, but we can't cheat physics very often. So we're sort of dictated by science often in our work, which is not always a bad thing. It's just something you've got to be aware of. Let me just take a quick glance here again. The question, are you shooting with 4 to 5 stop difference between highlights and shadows for print? You're going to hate this answer. It depends. And the reason it depends is because it's all about the setting of the mood. I know that that range that I just talked about gives me a plus this is on the paper now. This is not in my file, and this is not in my camera, and this is not what my eye sees. But on a printed piece of paper, I've only got about 4.5 stops of latitude from top to bottom. So depending on the tonality of my subject, maybe my subject is a middle tone, great. Then I've got about a +2 to hold detail on the highlight side, and I've got about a -2 to hold detail in my shadow. Now, not necessarily, it's not necessary that you always have detail in your shadows. It's not necessary that you always have detail in your highlights, but it is if you're going to make an inkjet print and you're going to print your own, because then if you're blown out with no detail in your highlights, then you've got an issue that you have to deal with, and that is that no ink is laying down on the paper. Does that make sense? So you got that shiny, dull, that marbling look on your print. Nobody wants that. So we don't want to do that. So that's why I always try to keep detail on the top end for sure. On the bottom, if you want to go black, pure black in your shadows, fine, it's up to you. It's a creative decision. But there is a lot of things that we have control over in the range of contrast, depending on where your shadows fall. How do you position a single light to ensure light in the eyes and get depth in shadows on the face? Great question. I'm going to illustrate that right now. Let me just say this. See if this makes any sense to you. Da Vinci made a comment, and some of his papers were found. And what he said was the light position of your light source should be in such a place that it creates on the ground a shadow from your subject that's as long as your subject is tall. That's 45 degrees, kids. That's what Da Vinci taught us. He said basically if you put your light at 45 degrees, you're getting the most rich depth that you can get in a painting or in a photograph. But depending on people's eyes, and if they have really deep set eyes, you might want to bring that light down just a little bit. For me, the placement would be in a traditional look, a traditional photograph, traditional portrait. I would want a good solid catch light in both eyes as opposed to one eye. So that's something that I try to work towards. And also, if you think about the eye as a clock, you want your highlights, if indeed 45 is something you're after, then you want that catch light in the eye to be around 10 or 11 o'clock or 1 or 2 o'clock. Any higher than that or any lower than that, it might be too high or too low. And you might lose some of the depth that you introduced. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. I think we're caught up for just a second on the questions. Can I just hand it to you? Can you just bring that screen back up for me? And let me grab my camera because I just closed it out because I'm a goober. Let me bring my camera in and let's bring Gabby on the set. So Gabby, why don't you come on in? And this is Gabby, everybody. Gabby, this is everyone. Everyone, this is Gabby. So have a seat right there, dear. Let's take a few pictures. I'm going to turn off these auxiliary lights back here. And let me start with this one, and then we'll start building onto this. So you can see, of course, I'm a big fan of these Bowens lights, and that's obviously what we're using here. This is a Bowens event, and I've become a pretty big fan of these lights in a pretty short period of time. They're very, very accurate. The color temperature is terrific. They do exactly what they're supposed to, and they're reasonably priced. I mean, what more can you ask for? So let's talk about this face situation. Let me bring my camera around. I'll try to set it right in this area here. And I'll grab my meter. Now, one of the things that I always look for, like I say, at 45, if 90 is straight across there, 45 is going to split between my camera and her. And it's a good place to start. It might not be where you stay, and it might not be where you end up. But it is a good place to start. So I'm going to take this light up a little bit higher, and I'm going to bring it into position. Then we'll take a reading and we'll check it out. Now the lights that I'm using today, these are the 500 Rs. the Gemini 500Rs, and they're all equipped with the Pocket Wizard module built in. So it's just a plug-in that you just plug the module in the back and plug in an antenna. And so that means now that I've got that control on my transmitter, I've got the Pocket Wizard +3 on my camera, and you'll notice it's yellow. That's the new Bowens yellow, which is awesome. And then there's a little yellow dot on the back of the head that tells me that these have already been modified to receive the Pocket Wizard signal. So that's great. So I've got the Pocket Wizard module in this meter, so I've got everything in here and it's all wireless. And when I hit the button on the right channel, I got a flash that takes place. That means there's no cords on the floor, for those of you that are new at this. And that's the point. It's, we got to make sure that we're good and safe here. So in utilizing the meter, I'm pretty big on bringing my meter around to the subject's side, put it right about where the chin is and aim it right back at the main light source, pull the trigger, and whatever it tells me to do, that's what I do. And here it's telling me to shoot at F10. So guess what I'm going to shoot at? That would be F10. I think it makes sense to just do what the meter tells me to do. For years, I've second-guessed meters and exposures, and I was always wrong. And the meter was almost always right. Gabby, I need to move you over just a little bit to your right. Just a little. Yeah, there you go, right there. Great. Perfect. Perfect. Let me turn off my IS on my lens. Yeah, it's something to think about, folks. For those of you that are kind of new at studio work, make sure that you get into the habit of turning off your image stabilizer on your lens or your VR if you're a Nikon user, vibration reduction, because it's just fighting against your tripod if you're not hand holding a camera. So just turn it off. Gabby, let's just turn you a little bit further that way. There's it right there. And just kind of lean forward over your belt. That's it. And just bring your head back to the light. A little bit more right there and your chin down. Just a little. Come back to me just a little bit more. Yeah, right in there. That's good. That's good right there. So I can see a little bit of a shadowing right there. And I probably want to, Rick, if we could drop that level of the lantern light just a little bit. Maybe just bring it down a little bit and I'll bring this around. And I'm just looking at that shadow from her nose. And I know that if I keep this light over here close to my camera, I'm creating a photograph that is missing the depth. I'm missing depth, shape, form, dimension, all the things that we're talking about today. I'm missing those by bringing this light closer to my camera. But as I move this light further and further away, and you can look at her eyes, look at the shadow from her nose. You see that coming in? Let me have your eyes right at me. Perfect. Look at the catch light in her eyes. Great, great position right there. I might raise this up just a fraction. Yeah, something like that. And I want to take a picture and let's just see how we're hitting for right there. So let me get over here. Great, Gabby. Just drop your head down for me just a little bit right there. Good, good, good. Let me just change this exposure in here. Good. Great. Oh, let me do one more. I got a blink on that one. Let's try that one more time. Here we go. Great. Good. Good, good, good. All right. So basically what we've got there is, a decent exposure, good shape, form, texture, roundness. And again, that's what we're after. If you look at that image, I'm not sure if you've got that on screen there. There you go. If you look at that image, let's just point out a couple of things about it. Does my cursor show there? Yeah, I see. Okay. So you can just notice we've got a good highlight on her forehead. And then right on her right cheek, you can see how that shadow just falls right into the dark shadow side. All that's doing is giving me that same thing that we're talking about. I've got good form, I've got good shape in there, and it's falling in there great. The skin tone looks wonderful. We've got good detail. Look at the histogram too. If you'll notice on that right edge of that histogram, at the far, far right edge, you see that little bitty gap? Pink. That gap tells me that I've got full detail in this image, that I don't have an area where I've blown out any of my highlights. And that's pretty important for me. That means that I've got room in there if I needed to move something around. I've got full information. There's some black areas underneath her hair, under her chin, around under her right ear, and that's fine. Those are just blocked up on the left side of that histogram, and that's okay. I can accept that. I don't have to have light under her hair. So that's what that darkest part is. So right in that place, we're in a pretty good position. Now let's bring on our accent light, because remember on that balloon that we had over there, if you think about it, I've got to be able to see all of that stuff. So I've got to have that highlight and I've got to have the shadow, and I've got to have all my dimensions. So right now I've got true tonality and I've got a shadow, but I really don't have any highlight. So let me turn on this light source. And this is just a strip light that I'm going to bring from behind and bring it toward her. I'm just going to spin it around, and it's just kind of opposite my main light. And I'm going to meter this to where it's just about a stop, maybe a stop and a half, stop and a third below what I'm shooting at. So let me just take a quick look at this. And let me bring this guy around. And again, I'm just going to place this right back here where the light is actually affecting her. And that's where I'm going to aim it right back at the source and take a reading. So right there, I'm reading F8 even. That's a little bit hot for me, so I'm going to take it down. Yeah, I'm taking it down one full stop. I'd rather have it down at about 5.6. So now it should read, it's exactly 5.6 now. So now, remember what I was shooting at was F10. So now this is at 5.6. That's minus 1 2/3. Minus 1 2/3 on her dark hair is going to be gorgeous, I think. Unless I've screwed something up. So let's take a look and see what we've got here. Chin down just a tiny bit right there. Yeah, good, good, good. Great. Good, good, good. So we've got a nice little bit of a highlight that is introduced now, and it's giving me a little bit of detail. And what that's doing is it's giving me just a little bit of introduction of depth. Can you see the difference there? And if that does appear a little bit dark, we can brighten that up just a little. Let me look at the edge. Yeah, we've probably got room. I'm going to bring that up 1 2/3. Let's just bring it up. I'm going to bring it up 4/10. I've got 1/10 stop control on these heads. And I love that about these Gemini 500s. So I'm leaving the full stop alone, but I'm just taking the 10th stops up plus 4/10. So it's not even a half stop, but just a little bit more light. And I'm going to raise it a little bit higher. I'd like to have it a little bit higher in her hair. So let me just raise that light source up a bit. Folks, think about this. Some of you that are with us today are not studio photographers. And that's okay. I just think about applying the stuff that we're talking about in an outdoor or an ambient light situation. It all still applies. Everything applies. Tools might be a little different, but the concept behind the tools always stays consistent. And that's one of the things that I learned years ago from one of my mentors was it's almost never about the tools, but it's almost always about the knowledge behind the tools that makes all the difference in the world. Okay? So let me shoot one more, and let's see if we popped up a little bit more snap in the hair. Here we go. Way to go, Gabby. Let's do one more with Gabby a little sparkly. Go, Gabby. Go, Gabby. Go, Gabby. Good one. Beauty, 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 beauty. Okay, so now we're starting to get a little bit of a shot coming together now. We got a nice little expression. There we go. Let's check that highlights. Okay. Our gap is great. Good richness in the hair. Okay, so now we might want to introduce one more bit of depth into the background area. And you know, it's funny, there's a phrase that a lot of people talk about, a lot of instructors talk about, especially in colleges and universities where in photo classes they talk about an assignment and almost a look sometimes called light for dark and dark for light. What they're referring to is, you know, in this case, I've got the light on this side of her coming in this way. So often you can put the light on the background on the opposite side. And so her darkest side of her face will be lit in the background, and the lightest side of her face will be in shadow in the background. This Does that make sense? So it's just something that people think about, and it's sometimes as an assignment that's given as a way of also introducing depth. For this next shot, I'm just going to leave it on the same side, but it is something to think about, and it can be a fun way to introduce a little bit of a kind of a strange look to depth, almost to fool the viewer a little bit. And we'll probably set that up here in just a second. But for now, I'm just going to bring this light on and turn it onto the background. I've got a grid. If you'll notice, I didn't talk about this yet, but on both of these light sources, I've got the egg crate grids, and the egg crate grids are really ideally used to keep light from not just spreading out, but keep it where it's positionable. Is that a word? Aimable, where I can take light that comes out of a softbox and spreads out and just bring it down like this. So now I can place it and position it right where I want it, and it doesn't spill onto anything else. With that strip back there that's lighting her hair, it's in a great position to cause me a lot of headache with my lens by creating lens flare. But because of the egg crate, I'm not getting any flare at all. I'm not getting any light into my lens at all. So it's the same thing on this side too. And some people will do that on their main light as well. It depends on the studio situation and what the job might call for. But I think we're in pretty good shape here. So let me just go back and turn this guy up and get a little bit of light out of this thing. Okay, so we're all on the same channel. I just dialed in channel 7 because there's nobody else in the building shooting today, so we can get away with just about any channel. So basically right now we're on a 3-light setup. So let's just take a little look here. Gabby, good, good, good. Great. So right there, now the background fires off, boom, and we got a light area on the right side of the scene, and it just kind of falls off and it gradates off to the left. It's sort of replicating what's going on with the main light in this position. Let me move this back so you can see how I'm adjusting that background light just a bit. So now power-wise, I've got it up. It's plus about 1.5 above that strip light. That strip light is coming in at an angle into the face that's pretty thin angle to the lens. So I can power it down a little bit. But from here, I need more oomph out of this because I'm on a dark background and I've got a grid and I want that light to fall off. So I want it hot on this side and I want it to fall off rapidly to that side. Now, if I want to do this further, think about this. Here's a nice little tip for you. Your light will fall off quicker. You'll have a greater and a quicker gradation the closer the light source is to the background. And again, it's science and physics. If I want a soft, smoother, more easy transition of light to dark, then I just move that light a little bit further away from the background. If you want to even out that background a little bit, just back this guy up to here, move it back another foot and a half, and it'll have a much softer gradation. But if you want that gradation to fall off quick, move it closer to the background. And I want to do that for this picture. So, in fact, I'm going to take this up a little bit higher and have a little bit of a hot background on one upper corner to kind of match the light that's coming from her on her face that's coming from one open corner over here. So I'll bring this guy back into position, maybe give it a little bit more modeling on the face. And I'm looking at a lot of things here. I'm looking at the highlight on her lips. I'm looking at the highlight on the tip of the nose. I'm looking at all of that stuff for detail here. So now as I bring this guy around, let's take a look here. Good. Great. Everybody fired. That looks pretty good. So now I've got a burst of light in the upper right corner. Can you see that? And again, if you think about this, all we're trying to do is introduce a little bit of dimension, a little bit of depth and form and texture, all of that stuff. Now, just to prevent me having to swap lights around and unplug wires and cables and things, I'm just going to make a little bit of an adjustment here. I'm going to take this light source and I'm going to put the same, so I'm at 2.3 on that power pack. I'm going to take this light and I'm just going to make this my accent light just to show you the difference. So let me just make this swap real quick. And I'm going to take this guy and make him a background light on this side. And what's fun about this for me is, you know, it does become a creative process, and it's something that in your studio, you guys can get in and really work and practice and play. And I used to spend a lot of Friday afternoons in my studio. I would stop shooting for clients. I would shoot all week, but Friday afternoons from like 1 p.m. on, I would block that time off for me. And those were my hours to shoot and practice and work and try things out like this. So give yourself some time to work during the week. Give yourself a little bit of time in your schedule to actually get in and do some work. Okay, you good? You all right? Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm going to spin this guy around. And now this time I'm just going to have it a little bit lower angle. But I want this light from now on the opposite side of her highlight, right? So now I'm going to have just a little bit of introduction of light down in the lower left corner of my frame, so that when I shoot this, I'm just going to have a little bit of depth down there. Great. Good, good, good. Excellent. Now look at her hair on this one. I think we've got something really nice happening here. It's totally different look to the shot. And again, we've got that light for dark thing going on now. I'm going to pull this down just a little bit darker. just a little bit. I'm going to go minus about 1/3 of a stop over here, and I'm going to tip this down, and I'm going to go a little bit lower with this guy. Something like that. Something like that. I just want a little bit of a wink of light. What's interesting to me is I've found over the years it's really easier for me to have more depth in my photographs when the photographs are of a mid-tone or a mid-key or a lower key. If my photographs are a higher key, I have a hard time creating the same amount of depth and dimension. Higher key photographs almost scream for flatter light. I'm not sure why that seems to be, but for me it just seems that that's the way it seems to work for me. Some of you might find, you might have something completely different in mind. But I think this is a good way to take a look at this and give it a test and see what you think. Here we go. Good, good, good. Sorry I'm being so boring here with what I'm shooting. Well, not you, boring, Gabby, but we're not doing a lot of variety. I'm just trying to show you with light, and take a look at this one. So now you can see that it's just a little wink of light down there, and we can spin that however we want. I'm going to pull this away just a little bit away from the background and let that come around just a little bit right in here. And I'm going to shoot that same thing, and that edge that was pretty sharp edged will now be a softer edge. Okay? Does that make sense? Now we've got a little bit more of an edge. Now, think about it, and let your brain turn this into a black and white now, and think about this into a black and white portrait. I think we've got something kind of going on there. I'm just shooting this horizontal because of the format of the video screen here and for the format of the Lightroom viewing. But obviously I would shoot this probably square or vertical and give some good depth and dimension there. How are we doing on questions? We got some? You want me to take a few? Sure. Let me take a few questions here real quick, and then we're going to move on. Let me get out here. I'll back up into the light. You good? Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me just find. Okay, so one question. Your meter said to use f10 on the first shot, and you shot at f9. When did it change? I went to f9 because I thought I was losing just a little bit of shadow density, and I had plenty of room on the top side. So f10 it wasn't going to hurt me by going to that 1/3. Sorry, I was looking at cameras everywhere. I'm looking at the wrong camera. There we go. Do you need a strip light, or can you accomplish the same with umbrella lighting? Oh, great question. Probably a question of the day. Sadly, umbrellas send light every place. Umbrellas will give you light, but umbrellas can't give you light that you can control. I always use umbrellas when I've got to photograph a big group, a team sport, sports team, or a group of 10 people, or a family of 5 in their home, or something along those lines. Umbrellas are ideally suited for that because they send light everywhere. But you can't control an umbrella very well. Light just goes all over the place, and it will kill you. It will light your background, it'll light your lens, it'll light your assistants, and it'll light part of the store across the street. I mean, it just sends light everywhere. So you got to be really, really careful about that. You said grids never on the main light, odd catch lights otherwise. That is one thing to think about. When you do put grids on the main light, you do get an interesting type of a catch light. If you think about it, there's a word that some of you have used and some have heard and some have never heard called specularity. A specular light or specular highlight is defined as a mirrored image of the device which created the highlight. So on Gabby's face, for example, the specular highlight on her face is only in her eye. That catch light in her eye is the only place there's a specular highlight. That specular highlight is the true mirrored image. It's a reflection of the light source. So if you have a highlight, say we're doing an evening shot and she's in her home and she's holding a glass of wine. If it's dark wine, if it's a glass of Cabernet, it might be dark red wine, and it needs something on the highlight that indicates almost a design element. So you can also take your softbox and take some wide black gaffer's tape and create a window. Well, you'll never see the lines on the softbox anywhere in the photograph except in the catch lights and in the wine glass, if that makes any sense. So I'm glad that you brought it up. It does give you odd catch lights if you use a grid on the main light, which is something that's probably not an issue for you if you're using 3/4 length or full length. But if you're doing a tight headshot or a fashion shoot or an up-close portrait, then it could very easily be an issue. So good catch, great question. After I meter the light, he moved the lights around numerous times. Why doesn't he remeter the light after he moves the soft boxes around? The only reason I'm not doing that is we got 1 hour to talk to you guys about all this stuff. In most cases I do, but while I am moving this around a little bit, I'm pretty cognizant of my distance. And as long as my distance doesn't change from the main light to the subject, I'm okay. And I know that if I'm an inch or 2 or 3 away, I'm not going to get much of a change at this distance and at that power output. If I was closer to her, I probably would. And if I was further away, I would have a little bit more of a safety margin, if you will, for making that mistake. But I know pretty much once I establish my meter and my exposure at that distance, it's not going to vary very much. Very, very, very much. It's not going to change very much. I got everybody in the room here going, what? I'm glad we're enjoying the crew here. Okay. Let me just find lens. What lens do I like for best for portraits, and what shutter speed do you like? In the studio, shutter speed doesn't really affect me a lot. It does a little bit, but if I shoot at a 30th or a 60th or a 125th, I'm not going to see much of a difference at all, unless I've got a very, very bright lit studio with a lot of ambient light. Remember that your exposures, there's a term that's been used. Can I just hand this off to you here? There's a term that's been used for years called reciprocity, and reciprocity comes from the word reciprocal. We live in a world of reciprocal exposures, meaning a 60th of a second at f16 is the same exact exposure as a 500th at 5.6. And that's true in an ambient situation. So those apertures, that's what one's +3 and -3, but they kind of gear together to make that exposure true and correct. So I hope that makes sense. A 60th at f16, a 500 at 5.6, same exposure. But when you introduce flash, everything changes. And the flash, and especially in a dark room, the flash is entirely adjusted by the brightness of the flash is entirely adjusted by the aperture. Shutter speed has no bearing on it. So my shutter speed really is not real critical when I'm in the studio. So for me, for 20 plus years, I've just dialed in 60th on my camera, 125th, and I've just left it at one of those two, just out of habit. But it really doesn't matter. And all cameras will sync. It's not a sync issue with flash sync for your camera. The only issue I ever had in my entire career was once when I did a wedding. This is going to sound stupid, but I did a wedding in Lagos, Nigeria. And my camera wasn't with me, and a guy stuck a Pentax 6x7 film camera in my hand. Unbeknownst to me, I dialed in a sync of a 60th. Unbeknownst to me, a Pentax 6x7 film camera syncs at a 30th with flash, and I didn't know that. I shot this entire wedding at a 60th, and I had a black line on half the frames. The good news was we could crop around it, and we were saved, and we were okay. But man, I know that everything will sync at a 60th or 125th except that one camera. So if anybody's shooting an old 6.7 Pentax camera, you better go down to a 30th or you can't sync. Okay, so we okay? Does that make sense? Are we caught up a little bit for just a second on questions? Let me do a couple of things different here. I want to get her to stand up here, and I want to introduce a couple of other ways of creating some depth. So let me move this stool out. I'm just going to bring this guy over here. And Gabby, I'm going to let you, stand just like you are. That's going to be great right there. I'm just going to turn on these kind of a twin accent lights, and we'll let this background brightness is going to come from our main light, and I'll show you how that works here. Let me bring this up a bit. When you're doing these kind of these live workshops like this, it's hard to not get yourself painted into a corner with something that you're going to try because it doesn't really work for the camera. So we're going to try to make sense out of this anyway. And so sometimes I'm walking in front of the cameras, and sometimes I'm walking behind the camera, and sometimes the crew's screaming at me, and it's just that sort of live TV thing. So hopefully we're going to be okay. So I'm matching these two guys so they have the same output. These strip lights are going to have the exact same output. And I'm going to have her, I think just for ease of the shoot here, I'm going to keep her in the same position, but I'm going to turn you just a little bit that way. Yeah, there you go. Let's get all your weight on your right foot. There you go, and let your left foot just kind of point it right out there. In fact, you could move that left foot out further away from you and not just drag it in like this. You got it right there, just let that knee bend. I'm gonna bring this main light now back a bit, and let's take a look at what we get. I'm gonna bring it a little bit higher, and I'm gonna back it up just a bit. And in fact, I'm gonna take my power up on it about 2/3 of a stop, and by the time I back it up, it's probably gonna fall into about the same exposure setting. Now, I'm going to feather this light just a little bit to my right, and that's, when I talk about feathering a lot, I'm just going to feather it a little bit, and that's going to pick up a little bit of light on that background. Not too much, but that's okay. I'm not too worried about the background for this particular picture. So let me grab this guy. We're going to take a new reading here. Let me do this one more time. Here we go. Good. I got an F0. I've never seen an F0. I think that's an I think that's about an F8. That's what I think that is. Let's call that F8, shall we? That's 8.5 right here. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? Okay, yeah, live TV. Da, 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 da. Okay, so we're going to shoot at F8. I'm going to pull one off at F8 while he gets a battery from my meter. Don't you hate when that happens? Let's take one. Let's fire one off at 8 and see what we get here. Again, I think we're going to be okay positioning. I'm backing up further than I would. Well, just because I'm going to try to get this horizontal in place here. Let's take a look here. Here we go. Good. Good, good. Yeah, so we're right in there. I mean, exposure-wise, I pulled this back a little bit away, but I bumped up the 2/3 on the exposure. So I think exposure-wise, if you can dissolve to that, you see that we're probably okay there. And I'm going to back up a little bit further. I like what's going on, but I am losing, if you'll notice on her right side, look at the light in her hair. I think I want that to go up a little bit higher. So I think I am going to bump that up just a little bit on this top. And part of that, too, is the grid. The grid really does block light. And wherever there's no light, it doesn't show. So, I mean, it's very, very directed. So I'm just going to bring that up. Joe's laughing at me. You guys are familiar with Joe Brady. Joe does a wonderful job on webinars here. And Joe's over here just laughing at me as he hands me my newly batteried up light meter. Thank you, Joe. You're a good man. And, yeah, I'll never live this one down. Okay, so now I've raised this up, and I think that's going to put that hair light, that strip up a little bit higher. And again, guys, some of you know this stuff, and this seems like simple stuff to some of you. To some of you, you have no idea what I'm talking about here. Here we go. Good. I'm still not happy with that highlight. I'm just going to raise it a little bit more, and I'm going to bring it in just a little bit. I think I can get a better highlight than that. There we go. I think I'm much happier with that. Great. Okay, so these lights, by the way, there's 3 heads here that we're using. These are 3 500 Gemini 500Rs, and these lights all come in one little kit. Here we go. Good. And they're all in one bag. Oh, I like this a lot better. Yeah, so ideally I would switch this around, shoot this vertically. In fact, I'll do that. Let me give you a vertical look at this real quick. And I think what happens for most of us, I think we get into habits, and I think photographically we get into habits. I don't always do the same things the same way. So I've got to remember that, it's like, oh yeah, you're shooting a person standing, you should shoot vertically. Well, that's not necessarily always true. There's going to be times when where it's not appropriate to shoot them vertically. You might want to shoot them square. You might want to shoot them horizontal. If you've got a group of 3, that kind of calls for a square shot almost. A group of 6, that kind of calls for a horizontal shot. It kind of depends on what you're doing. But again, all we're trying to do is introduce a little bit of depth. Now watch this. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to drop this light all the way down, and we're going to open up and show you a different way of adding that highlight and creating that depth from behind. So I'm going to bring this guy down, and I'm going to bring it around this way. Now watch her waist. Can you just bring your hands in such a way, I just want to be able to see. Maybe just put your hands straight down, but I need that elbow to go out just a bit and turn to me just a little bit. There you go, right in there. Just get comfortable now. Maybe just cross one foot over the other one. How's that? There you go, there you go. Now look at the arm. Can you see that highlight that's running down her arm? We're just painting that highlight down her arm over there. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to bring this around. And can you push this elbow out also just a bit? Yeah, in fact, maybe put your hands right on your hips a little bit and just kind of throw one hip out a little bit. And you can start to see, even visually, you can start to see that little highlight running down her arm. And by doing this, now I'm starting to outline her waist a little bit and giving her some shape. And that's what depth is all about. Sometimes it's highlights that give me that, and sometimes it's shadows that give me that. But either way, let me just glance over there. Yeah, either way, it really helps a lot. I'm going to back out just a little bit with my zoom. Here we go, here we go. Good, good, good. Great. I'm a little bit tight there cropping-wise, and I'd back up, but you guys get the idea. I don't want to be on top of the video camera. But you can see that. Look at that little highlight on her left arm. Yeah, I need to back up. Let me just back up and give you a little better look at that. So I'm going to back up just a bit. There we go. Good, good, good. Now, do this for me. I want to just let your shoulders roll this way just a little bit. Yep, good. And now just your head back this way, right there. And I like this, but again, to emphasize that depth, I'm going to move this around just a little bit further to the right. Something like that. And then let me just have your head right in here, turn right there, perfect, perfect, perfect. Now you can see we got highlight, true tonality, and shadow all right there on the face. So as Da Vinci was requesting, we've got everything we need right there for depth. Chin down just a tiny bit right there, good, good, good. Nobody moves, here we go, let me come in just a little bit. Great. Great, great, great. Hope that makes sense. Here we go, good. Excellent. All right, I think we got you, kiddo. Relax for a second. Have a seat. I hope that that's making sense. I'm just going to look at that real quick. Yeah. Yeah, so you can see that I've identified all those highlights and shadows. And if you'll notice, look at that histogram in the upper right corner of the Lightroom interface. You can see on that far, far, far right edge, I've got a good slug of a gap there. You see that? So that tells me that that edge light that's running down both arms, that's illuminating her leg, her hip, her waist, all of that, I've got a highlight there. I've got detail in that highlight. And what that tells me is no matter what happens, I'm not losing any exposure in there. I've got all the right detail in the right place. Let me grab that iPad. Let me take a couple more questions. Do you have the model show teeth when she smiles, or is it better to have them not show teeth? Does it make any difference to the male or female? The answer is a great question. I think the answer depends on what story are you trying to tell. I wrote a blog recently in our new, if you go to teambowens.com, you'll see our new blog, and I write a couple of times a week, I post a new educational blog post in there. And you can, by the way, you can sign up to receive emails to get a little ping every time I write a new blog that gets posted. But you can also write in there and ask questions. And one of the questions recently was similar to this. It all depends on what you're trying to achieve with your photograph. And, it's like my friend Arthur Rainville from Boston one time said, a photograph is of someone. A portrait is about someone. I can't tell you which one is best, to show teeth, not teeth, smiling, not smiling. I think you got to get some variety, but you also got to follow the lead from your client. And I think a part of that is a communication with the client. You need to sit down with the client before you ever start shooting and find out about the use of this and what is this really for? And are you trying to create something of drama, or are you trying to show their personality? So you've got the option there. It kind of is up to you. Did I mention about lens? Oh, what lens do you like best for portraits? For me, the longer the lens, the better. I know that my personal taste is to use a long lens. I love my 7200, and if I only could have one lens on the planet, that's my 7200. I've got great friends that cannot live without their 1635, and they live in the world of around 24. That's not me. That's not who I am. So for me, I think the face looks better the longer the focal length. And it could be just my interpretation of it, but I feel that the face looks great at that. Okay, I think we're sort of caught up, and we're timing-wise, we're just right there. So, folks, let me just wrap this up and say a couple of things here. First off, thanks so much for joining us. I think this is, we're doing these things pretty regular now, and we're going to continue to do this. We're going to try to keep them educational. We're going to try to keep them non-commercial as much as we can. But we obviously Bowens is taking care of this for us, so we got to talk about these lights a little bit. There is a program coming up that you're going to enjoy a lot. And it's a seminar, webinar that Joe Brady's going to be hosting, and it's going to be up on June 24th, and it's mixing the strobes with speed lights. So for those of you that have 2 or 3 or 4 speed lights already, and you just want to learn to integrate maybe 1 or 2 of the monolights into your workflow, Joe's going to go on the location with the speed lights and with the monolights and show you how to do that. So it's going to be great. So again, as I mentioned, the teambowens.com, check that out for everything. You can also follow what we're doing if you go to YouTube and go to the Bowens TV channel. All the stuff that I do, everything that's recorded, including our video question and answer for the blog, everything goes up on our YouTube channel. So we hope that you'll enjoy us there. Again, thank you very, very much for joining us. This is always fun for me to come into New York and jump in the studio with these guys and do these shows. And we're getting great responses from you. And thank you. Appreciate all the nice emails that we get, nice comments. And there's a lot of nice comments in here, so appreciate that a lot. Hope it's helpful for you, and just stay tuned. We got a lot more stuff coming the rest of the summer. You're going to enjoy some of the new shows that we have coming up, and we appreciate it. So thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and I appreciate you being with us, and we'll see you next time soon. Thanks again.